What is up, everybody? Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, home of epic conversations. And we are the place for epic conversations. And we're back. And as you notice, the screens are already filled already. Black Lady Magic is back again. Black Lady Earring Magic is at high level, as always.
I
am the host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show. And once again, wearing, you know what, Kinte? I'm going to block you. No, I'm just joking. So we are here tonight, Black Lady Magic, most Wednesday evenings. We hang out and just share and talk. And the driving force are the ladies on the diagonal, Dr. Tachi and Lia, the ladies with the earring game. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. So first, I want to welcome Lia World Traveler. How you doing?
I'm good. Tired, busy as always, but really good. It's nice to see everyone.
Fabulous earrings. Fabulous.
Thank you. I saved them just for tonight because I figured I owed you guys one since I couldn't do last week. So I had to drop my specials on you.
You're awesome.
And share a little bit about yourself.
Oh, gosh, I don't even know where to begin. I am a U.S. diplomat, a wife, a writer, a friend, so many different things, a content manager, speaker, event planner, and much more. And I'll share more at the end.
Okay. And the diagonal up, another lady with her earring game on Furious tonight, Dr. Tachi.
Hello. How are you?
I'm outstanding, blessed and highly favored, magnet for miracles and a solution for someone's problem. How about you?
I'm fantastic, as per usual.
I know. And a little bit about yourself.
I am a media professor, a filmmaker, a media content producer, and a journalist, among other things. And I have a couple of shows that I do, and I'll talk about that later. As you can see, I'm back in South Florida, no longer in Atlanta. So,
do you miss Atlanta?
Oh, I'll be back soon enough.
I know that.
It's their second home. You know she can't stay away for long.
It is. You know, it is.
Just like your president goes down to his other resort, this is going to be your other place. No, I knew that I'd get a response out of you.
Why are you calling him my president?
You're living. Forget it. Let's just go on. All right.
You almost buried yourself right there, Dr. Vibe. You don't want to get buried so early on in the show now.
Go on. As you know, Black Lady Magic is always outstanding, and we have a new friend on joining the Black Lady Magic crew, making a guest appearance, but I have a feeling she'll be on more times down the road. Miss Shannon, how are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you?
It is outstanding to have you.
It's outstanding to be here.
Good, and can you share a little bit about yourself to our viewers?
Sure. By day, I tackle domestic violence and human trafficking. By night, I podcast, and I'm a poet, author, published several books. I love to write letters, poetry, vows, you name it, I do it.
Excellent. And how many books have you written?
Currently have 5 published.
Wow.
I'm working on my 6th.
Wow, impressive.
Wow.
Over what period of time?
My first book was written in 2008. I published 4 in 2016.
Woo.
Wow.
Prolific.
Fierce.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
Let's get to this conversation topic tonight. Which, as you heard from Shannon's introduction, she deals with domestic violence and human trafficking. And I think it's a very, very, very important subject. My first exposure to this as a broadcaster, a number of years ago, I had a guest on the program, and I spoke with their PR person after, and we were just having a conversation. And I said, you know what? You'd be very interesting to have on the Dr. Vibe show. And, she goes, no, I don't know. I don't know what to talk about. And said, there's got to be something interesting for you to chat about. And he said, okay. So she came on talking about how she was sexually abused between the ages of 10 to 15 years old by relatives. And it was one of the conversations that changed my thought process and told me to raise my game up on this platform to really address these important subjects. So I'm always wanting to know more about this subject, and you don't hear enough about it, especially broadcast-wise, Black women sharing about it. So Shannon, I'm going to let you drive the conversation because you're the expert. And I'm sure Lia and Tachi will also add in. And if anyone wants to come in, I'm more than happy to jump out and just produce. If someone wants to come in, please just message. So Shannon, the chair is yours.
Okay. Well, this journey for me, career-wise, started about 2 years ago. However, purpose-wise, started as a 16-year-old girl in a grocery store where I was a customer service front-end manager. And a woman, her small child came in and she had bruises on her face. And I remember telling one of my staff, I was like, let's get the number for the Domestic Violence Center, the national hotline. And they were like, well, where is it at? I was like, look it up. We need the information. And so I remember walking up to her and telling her, what is happening to you isn't your fault, and love isn't that, and love doesn't feel that way. And here's a number. Hopefully there's someone there you can reach out to when you're comfortable doing so. And I left it at that, not knowing that hindsight 2020, here I would be working in domestic violence. I've always had a passion for human trafficking, but I never thought that I'd be working in domestic violence. And so here I am.
So ladies, ask questions. I can ask conversation pieces all day long, but if you have anything you want to start with, go ahead. If not, I can certainly start the conversation. Okay.
Go ahead.
So Shannon, you always had an interest in human trafficking. It's not normal for most people. Where did that interest come from?
Well, I mean, my first love, look, and please don't think I'm weird, but my first love actually was forensic psychology. I was very attracted to studying the minds of mass murderers and serial killers. I had an infatuation with Jeffrey Dahmer. Huge infatuation in terms of how he operated. Not I was attracted to him and I wanted to take him home. But I was infatuated with the process of his mind and what would cause someone to behave in such a manner that they would dismember people and then eat them and store them in their freezer. That's a form of power and control. And so having that conversation move down the road, I was like, how do we get there? What does that look like? Where does that start? Because a lot of people say, oh, well, they have anger management issues when you think of domestic violence. And it's not an anger management issue per se, because there are people with anger issues who don't partake in domestic violence, who choose not to use their fists or their words or their financial abilities to abuse other people who are vulnerable or least susceptible to, that level of power and control. I've just always been a human services individual. I spent almost 13 years in juvenile detention. So a lot of the kids that I worked with would talk about their parents and situations they saw within their family units in terms of abuse and domestic violence and gang violence. And it's just always been a passion to help people. My background, psychology and sociology. At one point, I was going to school to get a biblical counseling master's. So, helping people is just what I have always done, and it's what I do, and it's who I am. So, for me, human trafficking and domestic violence tend to go hand in hand in a lot of facets in terms of what they look like.
Ladies, I see a lot of nodding head.
No, I'm going to add too that, like you, Shannon, I've also been morbidly obsessed with sort of serial killers, especially as a younger person, just because it seems so foreign to me. Like that level of violence, that level of, just lack of conscious, the sociopathic nature of their mindset. And I remember being really fascinated by it when I was younger too. Like I would read even books about like Ted Bundy and Charles Manson and, Gacy and all of them, you know, everybody. And I did think for a long time I wanted to do like forensic psychology as well, but then I kind of started getting pulled in other directions. But I still fall asleep almost every day to forensic files. You know, whenever there's like these different documentaries on about any of the serial killers, I'm always watching it. I already watched the Ted Bundy one on Netflix. There have been stuff about Charles Manson and the Manson family now. I've been watching it. I just feel like, I don't know, there's something to be learned from that. And I always try to find like the common threads between their backgrounds. Like, were they abused themselves? Were they victims of domestic violence themselves? And in many cases they were. But then when you look in a case like a Ted Bundy, there wasn't that kind of abuse. He grew up in an intact home. So I always find it extremely interesting just to sort of look at the sort of the psychology and the criminality of these people's crimes. And then I also, like you, didn't go into psychology, but I'm a clinically trained social worker as well. And so I've dealt a lot with domestic violence and family violence as well in my former life before I became a diplomat. And I find that there are a lot of commonalities between some of the abuse sort of mindset of the abusers, and then sort of the vicious cycle that continues. And so I kind of would like to talk a little bit about that side of things too.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the factual information and break that down. When we talk about domestic violence, we're talking about IPV, intimate partner violence. We're not talking about familial violence, what happens within a mother and a son or a daughter and a father. We're talking about intimate partners. And the National Domestic Violence Hotline will honor intimate partner violence as the conversation leader. Even though family violence it does happen, it does run rampant, and we do honor that as well. But most shelters in the country, in terms of domestic violence, they take in intimate partner survivors. So we all know, or if you don't, now you know, 1 in 3 women will be abused or be considered a survivor of domestic violence over their lifetime, and 1 in 4 men will be have the same statistics and be a survivor of domestic violence. I think the one thing to consider when you're looking at what does it look like is basically starting at the root of power and control. Maybe there are some situations where the perpetrator or the batterer saw it in their family, but that is not a catchphrase for all people. There are some people who have never seen abuse in their family. They may have seen violence in another situation, what they've seen on TV, they may have seen it in the street, they may have read it in a book, but some people have never seen violence at all. And for some reason, there's something within them that says, I need to manipulate this situation because we were seemingly equal partners, and I need to now control you because there's something that's in my head that's registering. I don't understand who you are when you're not with me. So are you sleeping with your coworker while you're at work, which is asinine? Or are you on your lunch break screwing the neighbor? Or, you know, you only take 22 miles to get to your mother's house, but I see that the gas meter says that you took 28 miles. Where'd you go? What are you doing? That level of manipulation and control in an intimate partner relationship, it speaks volumes to who that person is. And you'll hear people who are unaware or not educated in the topic. They'll say, well, she has self-esteem issues and he's just being a man. Well, that's a level of ignorance that you can, you know, change the narrative on by just educating people about what domestic violence looks like. And it is not a class or race, or it's not gender bias. There is no economic status that is not touched by domestic violence. It affects so many people. And another thing to not talk about is teen dating violence, which is also very important, because there have been a lot of fatalities within that realm because of not enough education is being done in the schools to help promote and prevent teen dating violence.
Yeah, and one thing I just want to add, and then I'll defer to Tachi and back to Shannon, is in addition to those aspects, I'd also like to talk about the victim mentality, because there are a lot of people who are victims of domestic violence who believe that if they don't experience these things from their abuser, then that person does not love them or care for them, or that's the way in which that person expresses their love. And because they're so controlling, it's because they love me. And so they accept the behavior and it kind of spurs it on. So I do think we need to talk a little bit about that as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of times, especially in our culture, and I'm in Florida, for anyone who wants to know, the Florida culture of domestic violence, we try to remove that word victim, because usually when we're talking about a victim, we're talking about someone who has actually lost their life to domestic violence. But there is a such thing as victim mentality.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you have people who think that that's a self-esteem issue. Power and control, that whole idea of dominance, is not necessarily a level of what that person is feeling and making them a victim. Sometimes you fall in love with someone who is seemingly an ordinary person, genuine characteristics, usually a representative, however, who has all these great qualities about them. And then 5 years down the road, or 5 months down the road, or whatever, they have turned into this opposing individual, and you've already invested in the potential of them because they have played this role to a T, and you want that to come back into your life because you've already been intimate with them. So maybe you've created a soul tie. Maybe you have seen patterns. I mean, because sometimes who we attract and what we attract, and in no way, shape, or form am I blaming a victim, but sometimes what we see and what we are attracted to, we have to kind of take note of those patterns. And understanding that a victim doesn't seek out their abuser. The abuser is definitely seeking out their victim. And so having the conversation and also being able to be around people who actually get around you and support you, because a lot of times victim mentality becomes a perpetual thing because people, one, don't believe that person, or say, what did you do wrong to get him to act that way or get her to act that way? Because we do know women abuse as well. And instead of supporting her or empowering her or giving them permission to feel how they feel so that they can process these things, we blame them or we shame them. So some people stay in victim mentality because they don't have the right support system.
Wow. Tachi, I see you've been writing down some stuff. Do you have anything you want to jump in with right now?
I do.
Okay.
So first of all,
what I'm also going to do, I'm going to jump out because it seems like Carrie wants to jump in, and she said she's had a few experiences in her classroom with trafficked children.
And we'll get to that conversation at some point. I want to not confuse the two.
Okay, so, all right. So Carrie, hang on for a bit. I'll stay until we get to that part there. Sorry to interrupt, Tachi. I just wanted to, and also Tony has a question, but we'll address Tony's question after you finish. Have your time, Tachi. So go ahead.
Absolutely. I think, the whole thing about, Shannon, when you were talking about it in terms of students and teens, there's also, that we see this on the university level as well. I remember very well having a student when we wwere there's this exercise that I do called the Johari window. And for those of you that are not familiar, the Johari window is the 4 panes of the self. So you've got, your unknown self, your hidden self, etc., the open self. And so I asked them to take shoe boxes or some kind of container and do your hidden and unknown self and then your open self on the outside. But the hidden self, and I tell them, you don't have to put anything you don't feel comfortable. But they put in the things that, because what I've discovered is that people tend to tell young people to sit down and don't listen to them. So this is their chance to get everything out. And so I'm like, I was like, I'm never doing this exercise again because it's just so emotional, but it's needed. So that's one thing that it teaches me. But in that, I get a lot of the students, particularly female students, that will talk about this. And so I had one time that was talking about, my boyfriend's always like calling me like, where are you? And she said, and I was like, I'm not judging. I said, well, how does that make you feel? And she said, well, it makes me feel good. Like I'm loved. I was like, oh God. So I said, you don't want to be judgmental with this type of thing because you don't know what the background is. And the background for her is that she comes from a family she just happens to be Latina, and her family just happens to be, her father happens to be very macho. So that's what she saw modeled, and that's who she went after.
Yeah.
So of course her father was appalled when he heard this type of thing. But, you know, so I told her, I was like, okay, know that if you ever need to talk about something, that I am here. You can call me. But know that there are also ways to get help if you need it. So I said, I'll leave it at that. So finally she got out of the situation. But, you know, we hear these things as well on the university level, because you think just teen, and by the time you get to college, you figure things out. Sometimes it's worse. So wanted to piggyback on that. And also, wondering from you, Shannon, two things in terms of, and I know the answer is probably no, but if you've noticed types of personalities that are more likely to fall into this pattern of accepting abuse than others, or does that not even factor into things? So that's one. And then number two, wondering what you thought about pop culture. And even though it's not the same type of abuse, it's not violent. When we look at what Wendy Williams has been going through for donkey's years, though it may not be violent, from what we know, it's still a type of abuse. And I'm wondering your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, you just gave me a whole bunch of stuff to go off of.
I know. I'm sorry. I can remind you.
But remember who you're dealing with. You're dealing with Dr. Chetachi, right?
I know.
And don't worry, the Encyclopedia Brown ain't far behind either. So get ready for.
I know. I get it. Okay, so let me see if I can get all of this in a nutshell, and then we'll kind of try to transition over to human trafficking. So I think that in this culture of domestic violence, which is a very preventative violence, it can be prevented. There is no more dominant type of individual or characteristic that is seen. Again, of course, there are always going to be more women survivors, because it tends to be a violence towards women and against women. And their batterer tends to be men. But I always pay a little more attention to the men, because men are less likely to, men who are abused are least likely to come forward, to want to discuss it, to call the police. And that's not even just men who are abused by women, but even like in same-sex partnerships, men who are abused by men. The ridicule, the humiliation, the degradation that they get from people who are supposed to be in place to give them help and to, you know, direct them into the right resources. They feel like, you know, their masculinity is in question, that their manhood is in question, that they can't be a man and be a man who's abused. And so I don't think there is a certain type of person who is susceptible. I think anyone is susceptible if they are not aware of what they attract, if they are not aware of, you know, the signs in the beginning. And trust me, the signs typically are always there. And it's usually hindsight when you have that conversation. Oh, well, he used to get upset when I wouldn't put his eggs at a 45-degree angle on the plate. But I just was like, oh, he just is used to what his mama did, or whatever the conversation may be. And so when people process that as counseling, it could be, you know, your housewife who has 6 degrees and decided to stay at home because her husband's a billionaire. It could be a homeless man because, you know, him and his girlfriend came down on a vacation and they couldn't find anywhere to stay, and they argue every night and drink every night and smoke every night. It could be, you know, the middle class family who has put all 3 of their kids in college and they're arguing about finances, and she likes to shop and he wants to control it. There is no, if you said this is the face of domestic violence, of course it would be a woman, because that's just the culture. But what that woman looks like, she looks like a whole bunch of people. She's in a whole bunch of different socioeconomic classes. She's every race. And that same thing for men. Everyone is affected by domestic violence. And those who have never been directly affected, if you sit in it long enough, you realize that you have been indirectly affected. So having that conversation and being able to be educated about what that looks like and how to handle when people come to you because you're that safe space like you had with this young lady, Dr. Tachi, because that's what people need. They need a safe space. And I talk about this all the time. Before I even came into this field, and probably long before or long after I was in juvenile detention, a safe space is so important for so many different things, not just for healthy conversations, but for people to heal from hurt and trauma and pain. And if they don't have that, they continue to cycle in and out, because the survivor on average will go back into a domestic violence situation a number of 7 times before they leave it.
How many times?
7.
Oh my gosh.
And it's not because they're weak-willed or because they're, gullible or because they're stupid or because their self-esteem is lacking. You look at it as, if we started on the same playing field and for some reason that power and control is raising from one partner and it keeps raising because they're saying, hey, I'm going to kill the dog if you leave, or I'm going to take the children from you if you leave, or I'm going to tell everyone what you did when we were at home. And so that power just keeps going up. And until they come back up to that playing field where they're equal, they're going to keep coming back, because there's something about that manipulation that is luring them back into that situation. Now, unfortunately, with that idea, and we do safety plan around this because safety planning is so important. I couldn't stress that enough, because lethality rises on the onset of someone attempting to leave a domestic violence situation. And a lot of times you will hear them say, if I can't have you, nobody can. If you leave me, I'm going to find you. I'm going to kill your family. And, and people have lost pets. People have lost jobs. People have lost livelihoods because they have been, adamant that they're going to carry out these threats. And sometimes it's just the fear of their life. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, I will harm your children if you leave me. And those may not be that abuser's biological children, but that is enough for someone to say, I'm going to stay until I can calm him to a point where I have the right space to leave this situation. And sometimes it's not about, oh, I want to harm my children or I want to harm myself. Sometimes it's just a real simple life or death moment. If I leave, he will kill me. And that's no different than clergy. And this is another conversation that we have in like trainings, because a lot of times people talk about domestic violence, but they're not educated in domestic violence. And I love pastors and clergymen, so this is not a knock on any of them. However, there are a lot of them who are not educated on the patterns and the cycles and the power and control wheel of domestic violence. And so you are seemingly meaning to do well when you say, let's have a mediation, let's have a conversation. And this young lady could be in a shelter and the husband has returned to work as normal. And so that wife is trusting the clergymen because they all go to different resources. They may not come into a shelter like what I manage, or they may not trust an outreach advocate like the opposing side of our team. And so they're listening to a clergyman say, hey, I want to have you guys mediate, try to get back together because you should be married and you shouldn't be fighting and this shouldn't be happening. And so she agrees. And so when she steps outside of the comfort and that safe space of that shelter to go meet her husband, because the clergyman said this would be the great thing to do because he doesn't know the dynamics and the manipulation within that conversation, because that guy's probably told the pastor, I love my wife and I would never harm her. And I'm going to do everything I can in my power to protect her moving forward. And when she meets him to have this conversation, and of course she probably gets there before the clergyman. And when the clergyman gets there, that woman is dead.
Okay. I'm going to stop. I'm just going to hold you right there because I'm loving it, because Tachi is writing notes. I see that Lia's writing notes and nodding her head. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Carrie in now because she has a question for you and she wanted to ask it live. I will jump out. Carrie, be careful with your time and keep a watch on the comments because I may want to get back in. So I'm going to jump out for a bit. So Carrie, come on in, starting now.
Well, one thing I want to say before Carrie jumps in, Shannon, is that I do want us to talk a little bit about some of the signs that people should be aware of, because I agree with your point earlier about one of the main causal factors, I think, in people finding themselves in a situation like that is not seeing the signs and not being educated on what the signs are, or misconstruing certain behaviors and certain interactions as being some reflection of love or caring, when in fact it should be a red flag. Absolutely. So maybe after Carrie says her piece and we talk with her a little bit, I kind of would like to circle back to people starting to understand what some signs are so that they can just be alert and be aware, so they don't find themselves going down that progressive scale that you described until it's too late or things get really to a critical point. So hi, Carrie.
Absolutely. Hi, thank you so much. Jump in. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I want to say that I think some really good points were raised, particularly about young girls at college. And I think that I recently, I've been a teacher for over 10 years, high school. And I worked with children Black children in a variety of neighborhoods, and I have a job now where I see a broader slice of the district every day. Like I go to different schools. And there's this thing that I've come to realize. And it's also, I've realized it in my own life. It's very relevant. Like I'm going to try to be mindful of my time. But this is a real question for like some Black women who actually know about this. And what I'm going to ask might sound radical. And I've come to this, and it might be a lot, and I'm not trying to be controversial, but I've been very happy with the mental health services I've been getting for the past 5 years. I've grown a lot, particularly in the past couple of years since I've been doing DBT. It's changed my life, saved my life. So many good things have happened. So many wonderful things. Like I never thought that I could be healed, And one of the conclusions I've come to is that I might be done with dating and romance, particularly with Black men, because at the end of the day, it's a very dangerous prospect for a Black woman, and nobody really talks about that. The community is very comfortable having very extended conversations about what is wrong with Black women and what they need to do to fix themselves. But there's not this more authentic talk about how I travel the city every day and I see professional women every day and they look exhausted and unappreciated. Every building I go into, and every nigga I meet is super fucking proud of himself. If he's loading the vending machines or the principal of the school, he is convinced that he is a good catch. And I mean, I'm not trying to talk anybody else out of dating or romance or marriage. I hold out for the unicorn too, but I feel like nobody is telling Black girls the truth about what's really about to happen. And that it kind of doesn't matter how good or smart or honest or loyal or kind you are. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's a very good probability that if you become a mother, you're going to become a single mother. Chances are in that favor. And that society and the community is not going to cape for you, no matter how much you cape for them. And so here's the question, right? I've been very happy with this mental health care I get. My actual psychologist is a Black woman, beautiful, very bright. Like I said, took part in saving my life. But my actual psychiatrist is a Chinese woman. And I've always felt like I was getting such good care from her. But when she was trying to encourage me, like with the level I'm at in my growth, that I might want to consider dating. And I hit her with just some basic facts about the increased likelihood of abandonment and abuse. And you know what I'm saying? All these things, the reality of what's really going on in the faces of every Black woman I meet every day, all day long. I'm in a city where we're all getting paid. You know what I'm saying? Like the drudgery of it all. And like, she is this doctor who's worked in the VA and with Black women for so long and prides herself on the work that she does. And I was happy to have her. And she did not know about the increased risk of domestic violence. And she is a psychiatrist that works with Black women every fucking day. And it really occurred to me that all my doctors need to be Black women because nobody is caping for us. And so I guess that's where I'm at. Like, I think that we really, something is, okay, a lot of the excuses we give for Black men, we say they didn't have their fathers. They didn't have their fathers. Well, that boy needs his father. But we do have our daughters. Black women are raised by their Black mothers. So what is this message of worthlessness? What is really going on? And what can we do? I'm an educator. There's only so much I can say. Do you know what I'm saying? But what can Black women do? It's something wrong in the Black community, and it's something wrong with Black women accepting what they accept. And it does all relate to the trafficking and the abuse and everything else, because at the root of it all is we get all the blame and shame and none of the support. And like, what can we do about it? And that's it. I'm out. Please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you.
I think that's a multifaceted answer. I think there's many layers to that, and I'm not going to say that I have all those answers. But what I will challenge anyone who's hearing her question and then this answer is to keep in mind that there are conversations that need to be had. We come from a community where therapy was taboo for so long. It was our culture that what happens in our house stays in our house. You know, we don't share our family secrets, and we don't talk about that. You know, men weren't seen masculine if they showed emotion. You don't cry, you suck it up. You know, men don't cry, men don't do that. Whereas girls were allowed to be emotional beings and be vulnerable. And there are just so many levels of misunderstanding at the table of Black men and Black women in terms of dealing with relationships. And I mean right relationships, not necessarily romantic relationships, but just right relationships with each other and having those conversations. And it all goes back to a safe space. So therapy is important. Don't get me wrong. I love Jesus. I love God. But sometimes God and therapy need to hold space together. And I think that is an important conversation to have. And to honor Black women, yes, because Malcolm X said we were the most disrespected women in the country. We were the most underappreciated people in the country, period. And there is room for our growth and our development amongst each other and amongst other people. And yes, you know, we do feel sometimes that other people aren't caping for us, but I esteem self first and foremost. And when I see another sister, I esteem her. And we have to be able to teach our children, our little Black girls, our little Black boys, our brothers and our sisters, that we are special to one another. We are valued. We are worth it. We are wonderful human beings. I need you in this world for a reason. You know, express to them that it's okay to not be okay. Just don't stay that way, because we need each other to survive. And as for Black men, I don't think it's so much, and this was probably hit on yesterday, I don't think it's so much that Black men didn't grow up with their fathers. I think it's the lesson that their mothers have imparted on them in the absence of their fathers. Because I didn't grow up with my father, and my current book that I'm working on is Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions. But it's not so much what my father didn't do. It's the message I received around me about my father that made me feel some way about him. Because in my face, person to person, he was a decent human being. But the message that replayed in my head over and over and over and over again is, your dad is worthless. He's a nobody. He's not going to ever amount to anything. Don't be like him. Don't date like him. You know, and so sometimes what we are trying to run away from, we end up running towards. And if we don't face it, we will never fix it. So kudos to you, one, for seeking out therapy, because it is helpful, it's essential. And double kudos for you to want to seek out people who look like you. That is so important and valuable if that's what you desire. But we have to be willing to have these conversations. And I always say, even when you are broken, do not break the bridge that lets your brother cross so that you guys can have a conversation. There are so many things that we need to heal together. We need to come together and say, I see you, my brother, and I know you're struggling, and I know you're broken, and I want to see you healed. And have that reciprocity. It is so valuable. But we've got to be vulnerable with each other. We've got to create these safe spaces, and we've got to change the narrative, because what I heard was hurt. And that is what we've been taught on so many levels, that we need to stay there. And if you stay in that movement of hurt and pain and brokenness, you will never build this colony of beautiful Black wealth and power that we have the capability to do. And it's bigger than just money and buildings and communities. It is families and love and authenticity of self, because we take pride in each other and we choose each other. I'm gonna leave that alone. That's a whole nother podcast about to make me get emotional. This is my subject matter.
No, go for it, man. This is your rock, man. We want you. And I can at least speak for myself. This is fantastic. I'm just like, I'm getting such good knowledge because you have evaluated experience, because this is what you do, this is what you work in, and you're very passionate about it. And you can't, that's all the way. And I appreciate that. I know Encyclopedia Brown wants to say something. I'm just going to be very quick. There's so many things. There's so many comments. I'm just going to pick some random ones. Steven says, honestly, I have no idea how to help someone in an abusive situation. I know before we close out, we'll address that. Steven also says, nice job, Carrie. Very vulnerable and transparent. I agree with that big time. Huge. Latina NYC says, as a woman who was abused by a family member and had a family who tried to keep it in-house, I can honestly say I needed that therapy to know that it was not me.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
So fantastic. Want to also shout out to Dimples, Danny, Latina NYC, Dre's in the house, So Steph, Jada. Thanks all, but everyone for jumping in. Tony, I will get you in a little bit, but this is Black Lady Magic, so it's, as Queen Latifah would say, ladies first.
And I just want to say, Dr. Vibe, not to cut you off, Leah, I promise we will talk about the signs, and I will break it down with physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse. Yes. We'll go through that gamut before we close out this conversation. But I do want to challenge the thought process in human trafficking a bit after you guys ask your question.
Leah, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, the only thing that I wanted to add before we sort of switch topics, because they are very different in my mind, and they are very different topics, is to say that, I wanted to thank Carrie also for her candor and sharing her story and just sharing her perspective, because it's a real one. And the main thing that I wanted to say were two things. One is that I think that it is admirable that you are getting help. And I really believe that we should all seek it if we need it. And there shouldn't be any stigma around that, because I think that's one thing that we as a Black community, whether male or female, tend to shy away from, because there's this negative perception of it, when in fact, I feel like it's an underutilized resource that we could all benefit from. And we in fact suffer more because we do not seek it out. Yeah. So I applaud you for doing that and being a model of that, because if it's working for you, it can work for others as well. So I just want to make sure I just plug that, because there's so much talent out there and there's so many resources available if we only take advantage of them, and you don't have to go through these things alone. And then the other thing that I wanted to speak to was the, Black men getting a pass and sort of Black women kind of bearing the burden bearers for the race. And to also highlight something that you said, Shannon, about Malcolm X's quote that I believe was definitely true in the past. And I still believe that it's true today. That, Black women are the most overlooked and the most abused, and ones that are most taken for granted. Unfortunately, I do think that hasn't really changed that much. I mean, I do feel as though Black women have made significant strides, and they're definitely doing things and are in positions that historically we were barred from being able to do, but that hasn't necessarily changed our status on the pecking order. And in fact, I think some of the successes that Black women have been able to have, where Black men tend to struggle a little bit more, has even further kind of caused this friction between, man and woman in terms of traditional roles versus modern roles, where some of the roles that we used to play in the past no longer exist. So the power dynamics inside of relationships, and this isn't race specific, are being challenged. And so sometimes people's response to those challenging of the norms is violent, because that is still one area where I think men, not just Black men specifically, but men have still an advantage. I mean, I know I'm in shape, I'm strong, but if I really had to go toe to toe with my husband, I'm not winning. So, maybe if I felt like I was backed into a corner and I was fighting for my life, then, I do what I have to do. But I mean, just going toe to toe, I don't think that I could. So I definitely wanted to speak to that, because as a mother raising both a Black boy and a little black girl, where society is teaching them to act different ways, and where society is saying that my daughter can be emotional and cry if she's hurt, but tells my son that he's weak if he does, and tells my son that he has to be masculine and deal with a problem a certain way, but tells my daughter that it's okay for her to talk it out, be emotional about it, share with her friends, but tells him to bottle it up. I definitely think that we're going wrong. And that's again, not race specific, but that's in terms of upbringing and raising our children to understand that they should all be allowed to express themselves in the full range of emotions, feel what they need to feel, process things how they want to process them. And then it doesn't take away from their identity within their gender. It doesn't make a boy weak if he needs to cry. It doesn't make a girl strong if she chooses not to cry. But I just feel like we need to kind of address the way in which we, the current generation and the generation of parents raising the next generation, are perpetuating old stereotypes and myths that push what Carrie was saying in terms of certain boys get a pass for certain behavior because, oh, that's just being a little boy. But if a little girl did the same thing, then we would be all on top of her to be like, well, you can't do that. Take care of yourself. Be more responsible. I just feel like we can't say one thing and then practice another. I really strive, and this is something that I consciously have to do every day, to make sure that I'm disciplining my children the same way when they do the same crimes. That if my daughter does one thing and I punish her one way, if my son does something, I punish him the same way. Because I don't want them to get the wrong impression that some things are okay and some things are not okay for one and not for the other. And I definitely think that that's something that we kind of forget about because we're just bombarded by so many things that we forget these little things. But that's where it starts. That's where a lot of this starts. All of it is learned behavior from what they're seeing, but also how they are being raised and taught. And that's not just in schools, that's at home. Because we all know as much as school has a formative role in the lives of children, their first teachers are at home.
Absolutely.
And the lessons that they take in terms of how they choose to live their lives and the way they approach decisions come from the home, not from school.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to add that.
Wow, that was good. That was good stuff.
That's a whole elephant, Leah. A whole elephant. I said that's a whole elephant. That's another. Look, I don't know it yet, but we're going to have more of these conversations and we're going to bring the whole elephant down.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be a serious girl.
It is. I am totally
Dr. Chetachi, you've been taking notes.
Yes, I can't wait to hear what you have to say.
Yes. I want to hear what's been written down.
So I think we have to realize, and Shannon definitely said this, and Leah alluded to this as well, the role that religion plays in this. Religion, in this case, is the opiate of the masses. And sometimes we just take it hook, line, and sinker, and we don't use logic. Because, for those of us that are believers, God put people in your path to help you with these things. And we tend to, especially the Black community, have this Jesus fixes it all type of mentality. And I think this is something that even though that was the original way we thought, we still continue it today. And it's something that needs to change. So that's one thing that we need to look at. And I'll tell a quick story about this. I remember very well when I was younger, we had neighbors that went to a Pentecostal church. Now, I'm not saying this has anything to do with a specific religion, but they went to a Pentecostal church. And there was this woman who was being abused. And, the whole thing, religion teaches you to stay together, to save the marriage, to despite all costs, to just pray and God will work it out. So in this particular case, that did not happen. She was praying and holding her Bible as her husband got progressively angrier, pushed her down, doused her with gasoline and set her and the house on fire. So the kids, to this day, she's still burned. The kids had burns on their hands as well because they were in the house at the time. They didn't want to leave her. What ended up happening was this. I'm more angry at the men of that church than I was at the actual thing. What they did is he went to jail. They went and they bailed him out. And the neighbors told me they're like, because, they were saved. So they had to. So this man who was saved, it was okay for him to do that. Right? Because he was saved. Is that what you're saying? Are you telling me that was okay? That bothered me. And the fact that the men of that church were saved, so that's why they went to bail him out, bothered me as well, which let me know early on and, demonstrated to the children of that church early on the way things were, the way that if you're a woman, particularly a Black woman, you have no rights, that you need to sit there and take the nonsense. So that was very bothersome. And so that's not the only church that ever does that. And that's not all churches that subscribe to that. But there is a very misogynistic thread that runs through religion that we have to realize is in part responsible for the way we treat women, particularly Black women in society. So I think we need to realize the role that religion has. And clergy need to be more diligent with this. And so there needs to be training. Just like you were saying, they don't necessarily know. They know their training as clergy. They know their training in terms of how they're supposed to lead people in the ways of Christ and the Lord. They don't know this other end of it. And so what needs to happen is they need to stay in their lane. They need to realize where their power ends and somebody else's power begins, and to start to, you can't do everything. You cannot be the counselor for all things. And if you're going to, then you need to be properly trained.
Absolutely. And let me touch on that real quick, Dr. Tachi. I think it's important to think back on the history of clergymen, you know, especially within our own community. A lot of them were called to ministry. They didn't go through any formal biblical training. They didn't go to seminary or Bible college. You know, that's a big thing now. Everybody's going to Bible college and getting multiple divinity degrees and, you know, fluent in their Hebrew and their Greek so they can exegete that scripture. And that's a beautiful thing. But you are not taking in those counseling principles and then even going further into like domestic violence and sexual violence. And trauma, because trauma is important. Trauma-informed care, empowerment, having those different breakdowns and understanding what those look like, and then having a cultural diversity appreciation, because what goes on in a Black home may look different from what goes on in an Asian home, which may look different what goes on in an Arab home, or what looks different than goes on in a white home. And so having those conversations and understanding how they react to one another in those dynamics is important. So I think that there is room for clergy to learn, but if they aren't willing to take that role and that route, because it's not just I go sit in the class for 3 hours and I got a certificate. That's not how that works. I'm going to be teaching a core competency class and it's 24 hours. That's the minimum. Like, you have to understand what those dynamics are, and you have to get that bare minimum of what trauma looks like. Because trauma will keep people in domestic violence. Trauma unchecked will have people doing things that, to quote unquote the normal person, I do hate the word normal, but we're going to use it for all intent purposes.
You could say average.
Average, thank you. The average person saying, well, what's wrong with her? She crazy. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't stay with him. He wouldn't touch me. If he touched me, I'm going to hit him with it. But that's not how trauma works. That's not how trauma operates itself. That's not how power and control unfolds. That package looks different on every case by case scenario. And for clergymen, pastors, anyone who wants to educate someone on the in and outs of domestic violence, they've got to get their feet wet, and they've got to get uncomfortable in the conversation, because it will make you uncomfortable. And then you got to be able to do your own work, because self-care is also important for people who are going to get in this line of work, because you listen to people every single day talk about abuse and rape and sexual assault and burning people. I mean, a lot of our trainings, there are people who come into training talking about, and they're actual speakers, they worked in domestic violence centers, who have been survivors, who have saw, you know, their mother get dragged through the house and slammed through got burned. I remember, I will never forget the first person who talked about being a burn survivor. And I was just like floored, because I was like, can you imagine? And she used the reference of this candle in the bathroom that we have had our whole entire marriage. We light this candle on a regular basis. I never considered this candle, but the day that my husband decided he was going to take my life, we were in the garage and there was that candle. She said, I will never look at candles the same, because he lit that candle and lit me on fire. And I was floored, because I was like, who is cutting onions in here? I mean, the stories are countless. But you got to find your why. Why are you helping people who are in domestic violence situations? Why are you sitting there with a rape survivor in the hospital while she gets a SART exam so that she can have the conversation about the stranger who violated her body because he was drunk and he didn't understand that no meant no? You have to be able to have those conversations with men who will get laughed at by police officers because they're in a relationship and this woman may be 5'2" and he's 6'7", and yet she beat on him. Like, we have to be willing to create the safe space for survivors so that they don't become victims.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Tati.
Really, that critical. Absolutely critical. And I'm so glad, Shannon, that you're here because you're giving this foundation to this conversation that is just beyond. So just a couple of other things that I wrote down is this coddling mentality. And this is not to blame people because it's cyclical. We coddle because of being caretakers, because of the things that are happening, because of trying to protect Black men that are already so far emasculated in society. But sometimes it's to our detriment. And so I'm not just talking about, being a mother and coddling. I'm also talking about the same idiots who bailed R. Kelly out, women who sent money to bail R. Kelly out, the same people that protect all of the men that say, well, no, I don't know him to be, you don't know simply because it didn't happen to you. So, that type of coddling, we have to stop as well. And I know it's difficult because it's cyclical. It came from somewhere else. You didn't just decide you wanted to defend a bad person. I mean, the same people, and Leah, don't say anything, the same women that voted for the person that currently lives in the White House, you're part of this enabling culture. You too, et tu, Brute, you too. You're part of it. So, that's a cult. That's the culture that we need to change. It's how is not as easy as stopping it, but that's something that we need to change. And then the last thing I wanted to say is we've been talking about this whole brokenness with men, but particularly Black men. And Black men are broken. And Carrie, again, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think, for some Black women, that there's this, you become weary of the brokenness because at some points, and again, cyclical, you may not know how to fix it, but there doesn't even seem to be an attempt by some men or some Black men to fix it. So there are some Black men that are very broken, but Black women can't want it for you more than you want it for yourself. So again, realizing it's not as simple of an issue to just fix yourself. We know it's not that simple. But we cannot do it for you. And what's been happening is we've been attempting to do it for you. That has to stop. You can't take everybody to the mountaintop with you. You have to take the people who are interested in reaching the summit. They may not know how to get there, but you can help them. You can only help people who are interested in going to the summit, not people who want to wallow at the base of the mountain. Leave them there.
The other thing that I quickly want to add, which is a little bit apart from the domestic violence, but goes to the brokenness conversation and what Carrie initially raised is, I'm not saying, well, Carrie's in the comments also saying that she thinks that Black women might be better off being single. And I think at certain points in life, everyone should be single because I think you need to have that opportunity to understand what it's like to live on your own and live independently so you can understand what you will and will not tolerate and what you don't and do need in your life. But I also believe that as human beings, we do need companionship. We do need love. We do need to have that kind of, relationship. I'm not saying that you only need to exclude all other races for Black men. I'm saying just be open to it. Be open to love. And I mean, we've had this conversation. I think we should have it again about how it seems to be okay or expected that when Black men date outside the race, it's not a big deal. But when Black women do it, we're demonized. But I also think that at this point in our evolution as a society, I think that you should just be open to love in any form that it takes.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that you need to only, cape for Black men or only look out for them. If you find love in the package of a Black man, then great. And if you don't, then that's also great because you have found love and it doesn't matter what the package looks like. But the main thing that I wanted to add was that the main love that we all need to find in life is self-love.
Amen.
And that comes from the time of being independent. Because if you have self-love, you will not need, nor will you find yourselves in these situations, because you won't even necessarily need to be trained in knowing what the signs are. You will already intrinsically know that that is not okay. That's not right. That should never be happening. You shouldn't be checking my phone. You shouldn't be worried about if it took me 25 minutes when my route normally takes me 20 minutes. Because that's not important. The fact is that I'm here and there should be trust. That indicates that there's no trust. So why would you want to be with me if you don't trust me? But the bottom line is, self-love to me is the most important love, because you always only have yourself.
Yeah.
I'm going to
you need to complete yourself.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'm just going to jump in for a quick minute. I'm not going to be able to keep up with the comments, so folks, but it's a good thing, because there is community here and there's engagement. It's great. I'm just going to come on the Periscope side. Claude Diamond says hello to myself and Tachi. He says, can Wednesdays get any better? Jawaru Gambian joined, and he shared the conversation with his 3,600 followers. And Apopalistic Anointed says, blessing to you all. Folks, it would take me forever to read the comments, so I'm not going to try and keep up to the comments, because it's just so good. I will shout out to Artis. Shout out to, I know some of the, I think I said Dre already. I've just said, yeah, okay. But you know what? What I'm going to do is, I think Tony has a question. So Tony, if you are still on, I'm going to hop out for a few seconds, let you ask your question, and I will come back in. So Tony, I'm going to hop out. If you're not in within a minute, I'm going to come back in. Be careful of your time. I'm jumping out. So ladies, continue the conversation until Tony jumps in.
So while he's jumping in, let me go ahead and segue it into human trafficking real quick, because I want to get that conversation started. And I'm going to throw out some ideas for people to play with, and then I'll let Tony ask his question. So if you are like me, because this is how I got introduced to human trafficking and my mind was blown. If you are like me and you love chocolate, just put me in the chat or raise your hand if you're on the video. Mm-hmm. Keep your hand raised if you were like me and you like Snickers or Reese's or York Peppermint Patty or Hershey's or Kit Kat or Twix or anything of that. So the Hershey, the Mars, the
Kit Kat, Twix.
Okay. So the question, you can put your hand down. So the reason why I'm asking you this, because I will never forget, an FBI agent in my first human trafficking symposium asked us about chocolate, and I was so excited because I had candy in my purse, and I thought he was going to give out some more. And I was like, woo, where the candy at? And he was like, there are little children on the Ivory Coast who pull off the cacao beans that harvest the chocolate that goes to Pennsylvania so you can have your Hershey's bar, that goes so you can have your Reese's bar, so goes so you can have a Twix or a Kit Kat. And I was like, yo, did you just hand me my life? And so we started unpacking labor trafficking. Sex trafficking is important, and we will talk about that as well. But just keep in mind, if you look at how much candy there is out in the world and you look at trafficking in and of itself, $15.3 billion annually.
Wow.
Is what trafficking brings in, between not drug trafficking, but sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And labor trafficking isn't just the chocolate that we eat, or even the clothes that we buy, or the computers and the cell phones that we use. But we will talk about that, because that's another one of my favorite topics. But we'll talk about that. So play around with that idea in your head. And Tony, what's your question?
You just took all the joy out of chocolate from me now, Shannon.
I gave it up. I'll be honest. I'm a fair.
Gonna make my own.
Trade. Yep. Fair trade chocolate.
Those things. Yep. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, the best way I can describe my question is to explain the movie Misery. Has anyone ever seen the movie Misery?
Yes, it's one of my favorites.
Yes. This pertains to my question here, especially when it comes to a situation where it's a caretaker and a person with a mental problem or a physical problem or both, and it can go from a very minor disease to very severe disease, where several times I know of and I'm not going to go into my own detail of my own life, but I know of several situations where in these situations, somebody who is being taken care of because they have a mental problem or they have a physical problem or they have a problem where a caretaker is needed, it becomes like misery because their caretaker literally makes the person into a misery type situation. Physical abuse, mental abuse, or both. What's the statistics in the as far as the caretaker situation goes? Is it higher, lower, about the same? Is it considered in the domestic abuse approach? That's pretty much what I was wanting to ask about.
It's in many different arenas. I get a lot of conversations about caretaker abuse and elder abuse from human trafficking symposiums, more so than I do from domestic violence, unless it is caretaker in terms of spousal or intimate partner. Because again, at the beginning of the conversation, I said domestic violence, as it's referred throughout the nation, is referring to intimate partner violence. So not that it isn't noticed. There are seminars and webinars and symposiums about that throughout both arenas, but I see it more commonly discussed within human trafficking because it's a big deal. I don't have the stats on it. That's not necessarily my powerhouse. I mean, I could rattle some stats off, but I'd be getting them off of our website, not because I know them and I deal with them. But I do talk to a lot of people who are the caretaker of someone and they have been abused by that loved one. So it happens.
Wow. That's a whole other conversation, obviously.
That is. But I do feel like in terms of like the social work reading that I still do, just because I kind of like to keep my foot in the pool of that field.
Absolutely.
I've seen that Tony, that's actually a really timely question because there is a lot more conversation these days about caregiver abuse because the relationships are very codependent. So even though the person is there to provide a professional service, of course, we're all human. So we start to invest more in one another. We share things with each other. They get to know about you intimately, both physically, but also as a person because you're talking. And sometimes they can be manipulated. And sometimes the abuse isn't necessarily physical, but sometimes it's emotional abuse and manipulation, especially in the case of like elder care patients who are being treated at home. Some caretakers will take advantage of their position of privilege to be in this person's life, to be working with them, and will defraud these people or get money from them, or literally steal, physical objects right out of their home. And because sometimes these people are still living independently in terms of being in their own home, and there are other family members who are not around, they're much more susceptible to that type of vulnerability. And then I also do hear cases, though I can't say in terms of statistics if it's consistent with it the way it's always been or if it's on the rise, but there are more and more cases, at least that are being reported about, where caretakers are physically abusing their victims because there's something going on with their caretaker. And of course, there's like this power dynamic that exists because the person who is the patient is receiving a service because there's clearly a need. They need this type of support. And so they rely on the very same person who turns around and is then also abusing them. And it's not exactly like Munchausen type thing, but in a way it's similar in the sense that the caretaker wants to help you, but then they're also hurting you so that they can help you. And they gain some sort of pleasure from keeping you in a position of needing them and having to fully rely on them. So I can't also give stats, but I do know one thing I can say with some certainty is that this type of abuse, unfortunately, is rising, or at least it's being given more attention. So it may seem as though the numbers are rising. So I can't really say if that's a true statistic or not. But I think like with many things, there's just a lot more conversation about it. So it's raising people's awareness about it. And people are becoming more aware of the fact that they have avenues and recourse that they can take.
Absolutely.
I have a question based off of for Shannon, based off of the conversation on the side. It's turning to mental illness now. How much of a factor is mental illness in whether any type of abuse, any type of trafficking? How much does mental illness play into it?
I think there are spectrums of mental illness within both of those arenas. I think in human trafficking, you probably see more narcissistic behaviors. Okay. And there are levels of the game within it. And we could even talk specifically like within sex trafficking. It's so far sophisticated past, like, say, drug trafficking, because once you sell a product, once it's used, it's gone. But once you sell a human being, you can in essence sell them as many times as they're readily available. And so you have people who are as young as 12 and 13 recruiting these young girls. The Super Bowl is one of the biggest ticket items for trafficking across the board on any given event ever in all of our history. That is where it happens. On vacations, cruise ships, that's big stuff. But in terms of mental health on both of those, it plays a part, but it is not the reason for. And I want to honor those who have mental illness and don't abuse, who don't traffic, because when we use that as a, oh, look for the crazy person, look for the this, everyone will use that and it becomes a stigma. And so people don't want to then share or get the treatment that they need because they have this diagnosis. And someone will say, oh, well, are you an abuser? Or do you have this behavior? And it's like, that's not fair. There are people who are average, as Lia said, and have nothing. They're not bipolar. They're not, schizophrenic. They're not any of those things. And they just have an issue and a manipulative one at that allows them to turn the hands of power and control on their loved one, their intimate partner. I mean, you think of intimacy in and of itself and sexual intimacy even further. Once you give yourself to someone, that level of not just intimacy, but that soul tie, that mental, a lot of things change after you have sex, even mentally. Like your clarity is shot. I don't care what anybody says. What you thought clearer, a lot clearer when you weren't having sex with that person. And so now that you have sex with them and let the sex be good, amazing, wild, or whatever you like. And it is that much easier for someone to manipulate you, to have power and control over you. Or if they're the breadwinner, there are a lot of people who are financially abused domestically. Like that is a real thing where you stay at home, they make all the money, and they literally penny for penny shell money out to you. Or you actually work and you bring all the money home and they tell you what they're going to do with it and how you're not getting any of it. Like that stuff is real. Cyber stalking is real. Tapping into all of your accounts, changing all your passcodes, finding out all of your information on social media, knowing every single location. We always tell people in safety planning, turn off your Bluetooth, turn off your location. And I always tell people on a hotline call, if you're going to be a person, because we're millennials, it happens. You want to take a picture. You want people to know that you had a beautiful caramel latte at Starbucks or whatever the case may be. It's like, find you a good white wall. I am infamous for the white wall. Find you a good white wall because no one will know where you are. Keep the cup out of it. Keep the scone out of it. Keep the taco out of it. Find you a white wall and take your picture because they won't know if you're in a hospital or a bathroom or your granny house. And make sure your location and your Bluetooth are off. And people are like, oh my gosh, I would have never thought. I was like, well, they see a green wall. They know you at Starbucks. I'm sorry. Like, there are just certain things that we can identify, especially we're creatures of habit. And people don't realize when they're taking these photos, like people who abuse, people who are perpetrators, they look for clues. You don't know why they 729 Habascus Street because when you took a picture in front of your house, it said 729 on it. And so when they looked in your glasses, they saw your street sign through, and you don't think, why would people do that? People do that. And so now they know where you live. So you wonder why now you have a stalker, why there's someone outside in your bushes, because you just basically gave them the blueprint of your day. And it's not that that's okay, because it's not. But we have to be aware. We have to be mindful of the fact that predators, that is their job. They are going to seek you out. They pay attention to the vulnerabilities. Same thing with trafficking. They look at the vulnerabilities. They pay attention to the cycles. People traveling, they know if you're by yourself, prime ticket. If you're on a spring break with a whole bunch of girls, and I mean, they groom. That is what they have been famous for. That's why it is such a big business. Both of them are preventative, however. So the culture in the mental health community in these arenas, it runs rampant, but I think more so than anything, for domestic violence is strictly power and control. For human trafficking, it is power and control and money. It is very difficult. I'm not going to say you cannot, because I believe that one day we can eradicate them both. But at this time, you have got to have some really good arsenals to stop $15.3 billion.
Wow. Wow. Dr. Tachi, I know you've been taking I saw some more note taking.
I mean, there are just so many points that you can't help but to not take notes. I had a question, and I know that we're talking about the trafficking end of it now, but I had a question in general about the other end we were talking about.
Absolutely.
Do you feel, or does it seem that women in general get guilted into caring?
Sometimes I don't think they need to be guilted into caring. I mean, we're all women on this panel with the exception of Dr. Bai.
I can step out.
You think no. And what I'm saying that because I think we as women already know kind of that answer. Have you been with someone who wasn't the best person for you, and there was just, you saw the potential and you saw who they could be, and you wanted to. We like projects. I mean, I'm not gonna say every woman does, but a lot of times we as women like projects, and we want to fix that person, and we want to see them, what we saw in them, that potential, that glimmer, that little glimmer that we thought was gold. It was a speck. It was dust. It was glitter, but it wasn't the real thing. And we were made to believe that it was going to eventually become gold, and it's not. And so
yes.
We have this, and I always tell people there is nothing wrong, and hear me well when I say this, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you wanting a happily ever after. Happiness is an inside job, and you have to live out that, in your faith, in your feet, in your actions, in your word. And so you can create happily ever after, but you also have to be cognizant about who you allow into your sanctuary, who you allow into your space. And so sometimes, yes, I think we feel guilty because, and Carrie had mentioned this earlier, and I think this is another topic that we have to come back to at some point, maybe not tonight, but there is a huge disparity with us being reared in this whole movement of abandonment and attachment. And I think when we have these dysfunctions, as I like to call them, and they're unchecked, we create these guilty ideas about, oh, I need to make this work because, my daddy left me or my mama didn't love me. So, and that's why a lot of times people have babies, because they're looking for someone who can find them.
I'm just going to interrupt you just for a moment. Encyclopedia Brown, aka Lia World Traveler, is going to be stepping out because she has very long days. So, Lia, just give any final comments and your contact information and get some rest.
Thank you. I guess the last thing that I'd like to say is that I think we need to have a separate conversation about human trafficking, because I think we're only really going to be able to scratch the surface on this conversation, because domestic violence alone could be several conversations, because there's just so many elements and facets to it. But I think, oh, you're welcome, Carrie. I think the only points that I want to make are ones that I've already said that are reiterated, and to ask Shannon one more time, please, before you sign off, to just give a quick rundown of what the warning signs are, so that people can kind of use that as a knowledge base for themselves, and or provide links to resources if you don't have an opportunity to, because I always like to leave people with with resources and information.
And
I do think a large part of this problem in terms of the continuation of domestic violence situations specifically, because human trafficking is a different beast, is that people are unaware of the signs, or they don't realize that they're looking in the face of a sign and they perceive it as something else, which also kind of goes to their pathology as well. But I think that you need to remember that the most important love is self-love, because again, I think if you feel this self-love in yourself and you have this independence, then I think you might be more capable of seeing when things aren't right in the relationship you have with your partner. And you may be more able to identify when these behaviors are changing from normal loving behaviors to controlling, isolationist type behaviors, because that's what abusers do, is they want to possess you. They want to control you. They don't want to just love you. And they start doing that by isolating you from your network and from your supports. But I know Shannon will go into that more in detail. But for a person who has self-love, they wouldn't allow for that. Because you know what you hope that you wouldn't. My belief or my understanding of someone who is fully within themselves in terms of loving themselves is that they're not going to accept someone else trying to control who they're friends with, how much time they spend with X or Y person, going up in their phone, that kind of stuff. Those are all signs for me. But so I just wanted to leave it at that. And this is such a great conversation. I'm really glad we talked about it. Shannon, you are amazing and you know so much. And I really hope that we can talk more about this, because I do think it's more rampant, at least the domestic violence side, than I think people like to give lip service to. And like you said, it knows no boundaries. In that way, it's kind of pervasive like cancer, because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Contact information quick.
I put it in the messages, so scroll back up. But you can find me basically everywhere at Lia World Traveler. That's LIA World Traveler. And on Twitter, I'm at Lia World Travels. You can find me also at lia@urbanintellectuals.com. And you can message me through Madame Noir as well.
Wonderful.
Okay. So thank you all. Good night. I will see you guys next
week. Take care. Thank you, Vidia Brown. Be well.
You're welcome. You too. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Well, we still got some stuff to go with. So, and there is an open spot, not on purpose, but Encyclopedia Brown has to get some rest. Dr. Tat, are you wanting? I know you have some more stuff you want to converse about, so please do.
Well, in terms of when I was talking about guilted, I think I was talking more about that end is yes. But I was also alluding to the societal guilt, Black societal guilt, in terms of needing to and always having to, shall I say, put up with this type of thing. It seems like it's incumbent upon Black women, talking about this conversation piece, it's incumbent upon Black women to fix the race. We always hear, oh, sister, just work with us. And there's never any reprieve. There's nobody to take your place. There's no shifts. Nurses at least have 12-hour shifts, and then somebody takes over. There's never any shifts for us. Nobody is there to take over. There's no reprieve. And so it gets to be tiresome, but it's almost like it's accepted that this is your lot in life. And here's again where religion comes in, because then in heaven you will have rest. And it's almost as if we're taught that this earthly life is not where you're supposed to have rest, sister. No, your reprieve comes once you get to heaven. And that's really what, and again, I am very Christian. I am not anti-faith and I am not anti-spirituality, but I am anti an organized religion that teaches you that your earthly life does not matter.
Absolutely. That's the difference between just some hosh posh, preacher and some sound doctrine.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, God rested on the seventh day. So you telling me there is no rest for the weary on this side of eternity?
Right.
I'm going to have seats because I'm about to go get this nap. I will check back in with you later. And so I think, in all seriousness, I think that we have to be willing to have those conversations and challenge people. And not that we don't honor our elders and our bishops and our pastors. It's just like, if it's not sound doctrine, bruh, it's not sound doctrine. Mm-hmm. And, this isn't even my seminary experience. This is just, my mother had us in the church at a very early age, and I was immersed in, sound doctrine. And so if it don't make sense, I'm gonna challenge it. And not because I don't honor you in that authority. It's just because your doctrine is whack. And you got people believing this, just like the pastors who have their congregants out there eating dirt. What on earth is that going to do? How is that going to help? Or the pastor who walks through the congregation, casting out demons. He ain't really casting out demons. He's sucker punching people in the face. What is that going to do? How is that helping anyone?
But the problem is there are too many people that, I shouldn't say too many, but there are many people who believe that and people who don't question. And when you have a bunch of sheeple, this is where the problem comes in, I think. And again, I don't want
to. There are so many layers, and that's a whole nother conversation.
That's another conversation altogether.
Oh, but, and I'll just say this on the skinny of that. I think there are a lot of, that's why I said earlier about the elephant. This is an elephant, and not just the elephant in the room. There is just a big elephant within our community that we cannot eat the whole thing at one time. We have to be diligent in the process of eating it, yes. And we have to not be so negative in unpacking of it, because we are not going to find healing in negativity. We'll be like the Israelites wandering for 40 years, trying to get to the promised land, overflowing with milk and honey, and we'll end up like Moses. He got to see it, but he didn't get to go enter into. And so we have to get responsible and accountable and take ownership of where we are in ourselves. And we have to be able to then look at the bigger picture, because Lia was right. Self-love is important. But once you have that self-love and it's overflowing because your cup is overflowing, because you have put that into you, invested in your vessel, that should then brim forth towards other people. And so you dictate how people should treat you, and you also show people how you are taught to treat them by how they operate themselves, or even engaging in, you haven't done your work yet. And what that looks like for me is I went to therapy, or, I did these different seminars and workshops and yada, yada, yada. And, I align my chakras, or whatever the case may be, and having those conversations, but being vulnerable. And that goes back to a safe space. That goes back to, being authentic and transparent about what's in our community. And I don't want to beat that issue of it's, Black people, because yes, we're Black and we have this conversation, but domestic violence touches so many people. And even within a Black community, the bigger culprit within our community is the violence against the LGBTQ community, and specifically trans women. They're at the top in terms of the violence on them and the fatalities on them, and they're underreported. And so having those conversations, because again, domestic violence affects everyone. If you don't know it, now you know it. It affects everyone. And so being able to see those signs, and there are so many of them, physical, sexual, financial, emotional, psychological, there are just so many. So we'll go through a few at some point before we have to close. But just again, if you do not have a safe space, you have to learn to create the safe space, because people are begging you by their actions, by their suffering, by their pain, to be that safe space for them, so that they can hold shop and talk about their vulnerabilities, or talk about their husband who abuses them when she doesn't do what he wants, or performs a sexual act to his liking. At some point when domestic violence hit the scene, it was a marriage thing. And what was the statement around marriages? Well, that's y'all business, and we're not going to deal with that, because y'all need to deal with that in terms of what's going on in y'all household. So it was okay. It was legal to beat your wife, to abuse her, to rape her. Like, these things were legal. And so when that conversation changed, because it's all about awareness, it's all about education, and we are a very reactive society. We are not a proactive society, which is why we have all this research for cancer, but not for the cure. We are not proactive. We don't want to get ahead of the game. We want to spend thousands and hundreds and millions of dollars after the issue has happened. And that's the problem, because everything that we are dealing with and that we face is preventative. Okay. And we aren't having the conversations that we need to.
So Shannon, good question. I'm going to ask you in just a moment. Came from Luma, and we got a number of people join in over the last few minutes because it's been such an epic conversation. Welcome to ET. Welcome to Lokesh, who's part of the Get Vocal family. Hello, Artis. Hello, Sarah. Who else has been jumping in? I know Bobby was in, but he's, I think, skipped back out. But Tommy from the WJMS family is in the house. Welcome. Question is from Tommy saying, how do we create a safe space, Shannon?
Ooh, well, you have to start with yourself. And what I mean by starting with yourself, Lia talked about self-love, and I'm going to add to that self-care. And you can add the other self-esteem, self-worth. And in that, you know, you have to unpack your baggage and kind of do the work on yourself. Like I said, if you don't face it, you can't fix it. So you need to go through your history. You need to unpack your traumas, and you need to heal yourself whole. If that means going to therapy, go to therapy. If that means sitting amongst the support group, sit amongst the support group. And if you can't find those spaces, you have to do the work. Sometimes we have to get into our own closets and do the work for ourselves and read some self-help books and, you know, cry out or pray or whatever it is that your mantra is that helps you heal, and then create that space for other people and say, this may work for you. It worked for me, you know. And if you need somebody, and then truly being that safe space, because a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, what you got going on? And that person will say what they have going on. Oh, I'll be here for you, bro, if you need me. And then you don't hear from them ever again. You cannot be a lighthouse, a safe space, if you are not actually going to provide the space for someone to be safe. Sometimes people just need you to sit with them and believe them and listen to them and trust that what they're sharing with you is safe. It's not going to be judged. You're not going to look at them crazy. You're not going to ever talk to them again. People just need to feel like what they're saying has value and be told, especially sexual assault victims, domestic violence survivors. They need to be taught over and over again, or reminded rather, that it's not their fault. That what happened to you is not anything you did wrong. What happened to you was someone else's decision to manipulate this relationship, to take you for granted, to disrupt this, what you thought would have been a beautiful thing, and totally blow it out of pocket. And so having the conversation and telling someone, and then within familial violence, because I know Marisol had mentioned that, not sweeping the skeletons under the rug, not letting them linger in the closet. Nothing unchecked gets healed. Mm. So we are putting Band-Aids over bullet wounds and expecting people to be functional human beings who are carrying around a trauma. And I was just having this conversation with a staff person who's experiencing compassion fatigue and burnout, because in this line of work, if you don't do the self-care, creating your safe space again around yourself, because you have to create that sanctuary, those things happen. And I was like, there is something in your life. And I said, I know, because I've been there. There's something in your life that's unchecked. You have decided to, maybe you went and sat it out on the altar and you thought, okay, I'm gonna go take that back because I'm not ready to deal with that. And so you put it in this pile. And so this was maybe year 15 in your life. And now you were 33. So imagine 18 years of you packing on stuff on top of this thing that you keep saying, I'm gonna address. Oh, I'm gonna come back to that. Oh, I'm gonna come back to that. Now I've had kids. Oh, now I'm married. Now I'm divorced. And you just keep packing stuff. And so now you have this big ball of confusion, because that's what it becomes unchecked. And you're wondering why you still operate in this cycle, or why you still have this pattern of behavior. Is because 15 years ago, 18 years ago, you left that item to brew and simmer. And now it's festered. And because that one thing wasn't checked, because you didn't have, or you didn't create that safe space, and not saying that that's our fault now, but we believe when you know, you can grow, but you got to face it to fix it. And so you got to have that conversation, and it's not fun. It doesn't feel good. Growing pains are just that, they're pains. You know, we're all on a season of storming. So you're either about to go into a storm, you're in a storm, or you're coming out of a storm. So you have to ask yourself, what season am I in and what work needs to be done? And creating that within yourself gives people permission to come to you with that, or gives them room to do the same. So we have got to start with that self space within ourselves, because otherwise we're all going to be expecting somebody else to do it, and it's just not going to get done.
That is good stuff. Really powerful stuff. Some more people have jumped in, and this is fantastic. We have Wayne has jumped in. What is up? Jamie, Miss CEO from WJMS, which is a platform that both myself and Dr. Tachi are privileged and blessed to share our content on. If anyone wants to jump in for a second, please just message me. Love you to jump in. This is amazing conversation. Tommy has another question. How can we raise awareness of the long-term effects to promote people getting the right kind of help?
I think it is not being afraid to come alongside community partners. I think a lot of times in communities, everybody wants to be the chief and say, oh, I have all the right solutions to fix this problem in our community. Whereas you need to stay in your wheelhouse. Like, this is what you are good at. And instead of saying, I have all the solutions, it's bringing a table, a community response team, or a safety audit accountability team to have a discussion about what everyone is, what their qualifications are, what they're actually providing in terms of resources, and then opening the door to people to give them the idea to choose what works for them. Because at the heart of it, it all comes back to empowerment. They know what's best for their life, and you have to give people permission to choose what's best for their life. You present the resources for them, and you give them the support that they need to make those decisions, but you also give them the love that they need.
One of the most important things you can realize is that you're not alone. You're not the first to go.
Okay. The humility that they need, so that they can, even if they make what they seem to think is the wrong choice, that they can come back and look at that tool of resources and say, okay, so A didn't work, I'm gonna move down to F. And, you know, sometimes we have to keep going down the letter wheel until we find the right thing that works for us. It's not a catch-all for everyone. What works for, you know, Dr. Vibe may not work for Dr. Tachi, and what works for Dr. Tachi may not work for me. And so we have to be open to knowing what resources exist in our community, but we also have to be understanding that people have to be trained, not just in the work that they do, but in the practices of self-care for themselves. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes you mean well when you go into work after your 15th year working in crisis intervention, but if you aren't taking care of yourself, you have no compassion to deal with the people who need your resources because they're valuable. And so we have to understand that there is a burnout for a reason, and people aren't being trained on a consistent basis, because a lot of times you get a certification and you don't need to get recertified again. It's not like counseling. It's not like a doctor. And I think that that's where we have dropped the ball. There has to be a conversation, a continual one, about how do we prevent people who are the best at this to not get burned out, to not leave. Some people will go and become a librarian because they'd rather just check in books instead of dealing with people's lives. But I think we have to be willing to get in the trenches with people, and we have to be willing to bear each other's burdens, not necessarily take them home and die on the cross for them, but we have to become interdependent of one another and then help people get where they need to go, because some of us have already been there. And I think that is a part of the conversation that we need to not be afraid of. I've already been where you are. And not that what I'm going to do or what I did is going to be what you need to do. I don't want you to take the same steps that I took, but I want you to know that you can come out on the other side.
Wow.
And what that looks like for you is a process, but there is somebody here, me, who will walk alongside that with you. And I may be only step 2 in your 12-step program of healing, but I'm going to be there in step 2 until you move on to your next step, praying and hoping that I can connect you to the right resources and that they are there available for step 3 all the way up to whatever step you get to your road of healing.
Carrie is back, and Carrie, thank you for helping make this an epic conversation night. You've really been very, very instrumental in making this a great conversation. What would you like to share?
Well, I want to thank you again for allowing me to be part of the conversation. Like you can tell, this is something that I'm going through myself. And like I said, with me realizing that this doctor who I trusted, trying to encourage me to get back in the dating game when I'm actually doing so well, focusing on me and realizing she doesn't get it because she's not Black. You know what I'm saying? And so to be able to come in and talk to some Black women and to admit and not to get just dismissed as bitter or, you know what I'm saying? To actually, this is what I'm going through. I'm not saying this is written in stone, but where I'm at right now and the things I've realized about myself, I come from unbelievably, I can't even believe myself, the abuse that I went through. And me coming on the other side of that and healing that and knowing that such a big part of my existence was pretending that my dad was the greatest man who ever lived. And like I said, seeing that now that I finally could deal with the fact that that's not true, you know, and it's like I see so many other Black women around me living the same lie. And I, of course, like my best friend is very happily married. I call her my bitter pill. Like, thank you, girl. You know what I'm saying? I have this very close friend who has a very, very happy family. But the vast majority of women I know, and now that I have a job where I'm doing better on every income level, I can see that in general, Black women are just getting exploited wholesale by their lovers, by their children's fathers, by their own sons. You know, the ungratefulness and the way that everybody is acting like it's not actually happening. So here's the thing that blew my mind the other day, because like I said, I still go around and work with students, and this is specifically for you, Shannon, although Taki, I definitely want to hear what you have to say. Because I'm not a safe space. I have my own trauma and I love my students and they tend to open up on me, but I believe in staying in my lane and I am not qualified and I have my own issues. So kids open up to me a lot and I'm like, okay, hold that thought. You know what I'm saying? Like, let me go call somebody, send an email and get somebody who can help you, because especially with the conclusions I'm coming to, is that I can't be telling a child the things that I think, even though I am considering trying to create a platform to convince Black girls, young Black girls, to opt out of dating, you know, all through college, after college. Why all of us who ended up baby moms, you know, we keep flushing these girls out naked. Like everybody, every generation has to figure it out on their own. He will leave you, girl. You know what I'm saying? He will leave you. It's not the same for us. So anyway, here's the thing that really hurt me the other day when I was at this one school, and this kid, who I've known for a couple of years. He's a senior now, not about to graduate. And I was kind of talking to another student in his earshot. A lot of my strategy is sparking conversations and playing devil's advocate with my students. I see them for a shorter period of time now, so I'll be trying to kick it off right quick, make them think, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I was saying, somehow we got on the topic of why kids fail their classes. And I was explaining to this bright Black girl that it's not that they're not smart. She was telling me that she was taking this class and she wanted me to know that she actually got good grades or she was smart. And I was like, grades have nothing to do with smarts. You know what I'm saying? Like, and she's a senior, so we're having a more grown-up conversation. And I told her, you know, research shows that grades are more reflective of the parents' behavior than the children's intellect. Like, that's just kids who do better in school have parents who read to them. Like, that's just a fact. It has nothing to do with how smart somebody is. And so, and I actually think she would make a really good teacher, which is not something I've said to any student ever before. So I was having this pedagogy conversation with her. And a student who overheard us, I wasn't talking to, Kevin, who's failing all his classes, bright kid, jumps in and says, like, very defensively that it's not the parents' fault and the parents could do everything right and the kid just chooses the wrong thing. And I told him, you know, like, yeah, the thing is, though, that's always bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've been doing this a long time. I've been teaching over 10 years. kids who are getting all F's in every class year behind year are being abused or neglected. Like, that's just how it is. I can't say this. I didn't say those exact words, but that's how I've always felt in my heart. And it is what it is, you know? And he was so offended. And it occurred to me, this was haunting me for the past few days. And it occurred to me because I would have done the same thing. I thought my parents were perfect and everything was my fault. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I guess if we're talking about helping kids who are, or young people in general who are being hurt, especially because I'm not somebody that's qualified to walk you through that. You know what I'm saying? I got my own shit I'm working on, although I do believe there's help out there. Is there anything for the fact that people usually don't even know, I don't think, especially children, if they are being trafficked or abused, they usually think, I know for me, I hero worshiped my abuser. I defended this person until I was 40 years old, you know? So I guess that's where I'm at. The safe space. Yeah, that child, like I said, I feel like he told me in that moment.
Well, I want to say thank you again for sharing. Your heart is open to the conversation and even your own vulnerability. And I do want to say this, and I you might argue it, but I'm just going to put it out there because this is just my own expert opinion. You are a safe space. Now, you may not be the safe space leading them to their ultimate healing or discovery, but you are a safe space. There is something in your spirit, in your psyche, in your conversation, Carrie Ann, that they are attracted to the point where they may see in you who they are. And, you know, maybe your inner child speaks to their inner child. I have no idea. But there is something in you that is safe to them, which is why they trust you with that conversation. And then you become the plug to the resources, which is why you said, hold on, let me call somebody. You may not have all the answers, but you create room. You create space for them to feel safe enough to open up to somebody about what's going on in their life. So don't ever discredit or discount the impact that you are having in the role that you play, because everybody needs a Carrie, especially in a school system like that they can talk to, because that is usually where it goes unchecked, because they don't feel like they have a Carrie to talk to and tell that, you know, and unpack some of those signs that you're seeing. So just, sister, whether you got issues or not, be the light. Even in your dark spaces, you can still be the light. Sometimes it doesn't shine as bright as others, but you can still be the light. Wow. So yes, you are absolutely a safe space.
Absolutely. And Carrie, I think it's because you have identified the issues that you have that you can actually act as a light. Sometimes people can sense that they can identify with you in some way, shape, or form. So it doesn't mean that you have to have everything figured out or you have to be fixed, if there's such a thing. People get drawn to other people like them, I think. And so I think these students see that in you. And so they're just drawn to you. So you definitely are a light. I wanted to also, I am nowhere near the level that Shannon is on this whole thing.
You notice tonight, I'm definitely not saying much. She's the expert. She's amazing.
She's absolutely amazing. So it's like, really, it could have been just the Shannon show and it would have been fine.
Well, she's got a show, her own show starting on May 5th. So there you go.
Okay, see, there we go. So, just some observations that I had that Shannon kind of put out there that I thought, okay, maybe I'll make some commentary on. And actually, Carrie said this as well, the need for more Black counselors and Black psychiatrists and Black psychologists. This does not mean that nobody Black that is non-melanated cannot help you, that you cannot be helped by someone who is non-melanated. You absolutely can, but I think there's a special level of understanding and caring when somebody does understand and can empathize with your struggle that is very helpful. Again, that doesn't mean that someone who is Caucasian cannot help you. That's not it at all. But there are special circumstances that Black women, talking about this case, go through that someone else may not be able to empathize with, and they're giving you something to do that does not jibe with you culturally or does not jibe with what it is that you need. So I totally understand that. And that's Black medical professionals in general, because if we go off of the medical profession in general, it's been shown in studies that when it comes to things like pain and pain management, medical professionals are less likely to believe Black women. So if we can take this into the realm when it comes to counseling, psychiatry, psychology, etc., that probably holds true in that realm as well. And Shannon, you can probably attest to that. So there is a need for that. And how do we support that? Well, we need to show that it's important by putting money there. Traditionally, our communities have not felt that type of thing was important, again, because of the other places we would go to get that kind of help. But we need to do things like, as much money as we put into STEM when it comes to colleges and things, and we want to have more Black doctors. Well, then we need to put that, this is STEM, but we also need to put that into specific STEM fields like psychiatry, psychology, sociology, those types of things. Even though they're not hard STEM, it's still STEM. There's still the social sciences. So we need to put money there so that we can start to recruit. Because sometimes when we look at things like social work, etc., the money is not there. We've been taught to chase money in this society, and you need money to function. So if we put money there to educate, at least that's one factor that does not prevent us from having more Black medical professionals in those fields. Also, we talked about the fact of safe spaces. I'll point to a group that I'm part of that is for women of color that are faculty. Those things are tremendously helpful, again, because you can't always voice the fact that, this person is an oaf. There, you can't always voice those types of things. And then especially the hierarchy of higher education, there are far and few between Black people in general. So when you say things, you have to be quite careful of what you say. For some people, everybody knows I don't give a damn, but some other people, I really don't. Some other people, feel that they need to be cautious. So these safe spaces are really important to voice what's going on. This is for everybody, but again, focusing on Black women often feel like they can't say these things and that they have to be super women. So when we have these spaces that are created, whether it's on a WhatsApp or wherever that safe space is, that's what needs to happen. Also, I'm
gonna safe spaces really tight because we're running out of recorded time. So get in your final point, and we'll have to start exiting.
Okay. I see how you're doing.
No,
all right. So I want to get
it. It's a 2 hour. It's a 2 hour.
It's a 2 hour thing. All right. So finally, let's just say we need to stop asking as a community, when are you getting married, and start asking, are you happy? So that's what we need to start doing.
And not even that, Dr. Tachi, not even are you happiness, because happiness is based on what's happening in your life.
True.
Happiness is completing the moment. It's like putting your clothes out on the line and it's forecasting to rain.
I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop. I think we need to do part 2 next week.
Okay, absolutely.
Because there are questions that are not getting answered because of the time, but we're going to, if the ladies are good, we're going to do part 2 next week, because there's a demand, because there's so many people in the room. There's so much conversation going on. So folks, we're going to do part 2 next week. So a week from tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to have the same 3 epic Black Lady Magic on, and save your questions and think of questions you want to ask between now and next Wednesday. As you notice, I didn't talk much because Shannon is the expert. She has a valued experience in this area. I like, okay, final quick thoughts and closing out. Dr. Tachi, where can people get a hold of you?
I am on Twitter at Tachiata. That's also my name on Periscope. Dr._Tachi on Instagram. Also at Mediascope 16 on Facebook Live every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on Periscope, Facebook Live, and WJMSradio.com. I do Mediascope. We talk about media, tech, and pop culture news. Also, Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, I am on WJMS Radio with Kevin No Malone for TV Channeling, which is a TV review, TV news, and film and entertainment show.
The star, well, one of the two stars of the night, the other one was Carrie, but Shannon, you were the main star tonight. Where can people touch base with you?
Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Shannon Ford like the president - Jefferson like the president. You can find me. I am the only one in the entire universe. Also, if you're interested in some poetry, I do write some pretty good poetry, if I do say so myself. Check me out on Amazon. I have 5 books and look forward to Dismantling Daddy Dysfunctions, which will be out in 2020.
Oh, I want to know about that book because I work with fathers. That's my main thing. I do work with fathers. Geez, there is I got to do this right quick. I like to thank everybody. Like, I don't think we've had a Black Lady Magic episode with as much engagement. I've got my 5-minute countdown that started. So I like to thank everybody. I'm going to try to get everybody in as much as possible. Tommy, Lokesh, So Steph, E.T., Artis, Sarah, Latina NYC, Stephen, Carrie, of course, Danny, Dimples, Tony. I know that Dre was on. I know that Kente was on. I know Jamie was on. I know Bobby was on. There's a whole list of people. Also on U4Sight just joined in. Real Night Queen. These are people from Periscope Joints PC, Jaru Gambian, and Claude Diamond. And I think Serena Wills also retweeted it from Periscope. If you want to get a hold of me, the best way to get in touch with me, go to my website, thedrvibeshow.com. If I forgot to mention your same name, it was because of my head, not my heart. These ladies will be back next week. And also big thanks to Lia, of course, Lia World Traveler. Definitely next week. So I'll be putting up the post on Get Vocal. Thanks again to Get Vocal. You'll see it by tomorrow. Make sure you have it in your calendar. And tomorrow night, I'm back at 9 p.m. Eastern Time with D. Scott Smith talking about motivational listening.
Yeah.
So catch me tomorrow night. If you have any questions for me, I'm going to put it right quick into the comment section because I got a minute and a half left. You can email me at dr.vibe at the Dr. Vibe Show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. You may stay on for a quick after show after. God bless, peace to all, keep the faith. And this is the longest Get Vocal conversation I've ever done. You guys made it happen. Good night.
Night.